Now, my apologies for being absent for a little while. I've been doing a lot of work on my other channel, which is very time consuming. But I have the feeling that the next few weeks will allow me not necessarily more time, but the time I would have devoted to the other channel, more time to this channel. Having said that, I was on Facebook and saw a post with a link to an article. It's not really an article per se, but a bunch of comments made by Fox News of all things. And once again, we return to the issue of so-called herbivore men in Japan. Specifically, the article is titled "Lack of Babies Could Mean Extinction of the Japanese People." Now, part of it is related to the aging population and the need to replace them and so on and so forth. But there are other things I see going on here, and when they try to speculate as to why this is happening, one of the reasons, of course, was, and I'll read it off, I'll post a link to the article. Another argument is that there are more effeminate men, now called herbivores, there who are either not interested in sex or women don't find masculine enough. Then some suggest many young Japanese people prefer virtual friends, quote unquote, with a robot or on the internet, while others suggest their fascination with comics rather than relationships is the cause for a lack of babies. A study was released earlier this year in which it showed Japan's young people are shunning the idea of marriage and having children. Now, this is all very interesting, but the bottom line here is that shunning the idea of marriage and children, having children, there must be a reason for that. Now, the reason seems fairly obvious to me, and I've talked about both Japanese and Korean society previously, and how it's essentially a work yourself to death society for the male. It stands to reason that most men, be they Japanese or whatever they might be, have no interest in working in such an environment. There's very little reward, personal at least. They are very collectivist societies, and individuality is heavily subjugated. But if a man is going to be miserable doing something, then why should he do it? Why should a male pursue marriage and children if he knows he's condemning himself to at the very least, an unpleasant stay or an unpleasant situation? It seems quite clear to me that these men who are choosing not, for whatever reason, not to bother with the whole relationship marriage game, it's quite alarming. And what I'm seeing is less that we all realize that women are the selectors, but women don't find them masculine enough. What does that mean? Well, who knows what it means specifically, and who cares what women find masculine enough or not? But the point is, in order to have a lack of appeal to a majority of women on that massive level, there must be something major going down. Men are choosing just to do their own thing. And I'm of the inclination, though I'm by no means an expert on it, that many of these herbivores, whilst they do have certain tendencies in the general sort of description box of what a Japanese herbivore is, I think a lot of them might be a lot more individual than people are suggesting. And the fact that they're just not interested in sex or women doesn't mean that they're gay by any means. It simply means that they just don't care anymore, and they know that society doesn't give a shit about them, so why should they give a shit as well? It just makes no sense. So in Japan, at least, there seems to be a very real danger of the society sort of collapsing and imploding, of society itself falling apart. But does it really matter? The point is that, unlike the West, there's been a very fast reaction that's taken place in Japan. I suspect because of the 90s, the zombie banks, and well, the financial crisis, which they've never really recovered from entirely. And what we see is men unwilling to engage in worker drone behavior. This will come elsewhere. It's just a matter of time. But as I've said before, that extreme conditions, circumstances can lead to extreme reactions. If you have an extremely collectivist society which requires the obedience of men in the role of the worker provider, worker drone, the collapse of that society will come that much more quickly. It's clear. If there are more internal social pressures being exerted on a certain percentage of the population, in this case, half of them men, many of them are going to defect from that social expectation or those social expectations and go their own way. In essence, these men are simply MGTOW. Their men are going their way, and men going their own way are only defined by choosing not to pursue women in relationships or marriage. But what are the consequences? See, to me, this is all very clear. Japan is suffering from a lack of reproductive power. There must be a reason. And certainly not because women have changed, although it's possible. But it's because men, just some of the men there, really aren't interested anymore in becoming a company slave, working 80 hours a week, getting drunk with the boss, and being so exhausted when they come home that they just don't have time for anything. Um, it's very clear. However, as could be expected, there was a long chain of Facebook comments where this article was posted on Facebook, disparaging the men and saying that they need to step up their game and man up, and the usual BS, which is of course not surprising, never is. But this is obviously a very strong concern that people have. But rather than look at the causes, why? Why do these men, specifically these so-called herbivore men, not want to do the relationship, marriage, baby game anymore? Why? There must be a reason. And the simple reason, if you dig deep enough, and I don't even think you need to dig particularly deep there, just not satisfied with it. That paradigm is dead. And in Japan, it was accelerated by the collectivist nature of the society and the extreme social pressures exerted on men there. Now, following what I'm going to say right now is admittedly a bit of speculation, but as much as we like to think we've advanced past some of the forms of government, negative forms of government we experienced in the early and mid-20th century, we are just a hair's breadth away from that at the end of the day. We always are. Unlike the laws of science or nature, human political institutions are mutable and they change. And so things can change in the blink of an eye. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because, unfortunately, the biological imperative to reproduce for men, which is enforced by men themselves, as we see with all these traditionalists and people lambasting Barbarossa and others of like mind, and reinforced, of course, socially by those biological urges by women, men, and the state. That is such a strong and powerful force that if enough men were to defect, were to leave the herd, as it were, that the state, and I'm not naming the specific state here, but the state as a abstract entity could indeed enact laws to compel men to engage in so-called traditional behavior, forcing them, in a sense, pursuing marriage. Now, and babies and all the conventional nonsense. This need not be, if this were to take place, it needn't be a direct act of coercion or force. It could be very subtle. For example, we already know that in many states in the United States and other countries, married couples get tax benefits that non-married people do not. For the simple reason, the argument goes, is that marriage and babies help society, so they should get more benefits. Now, I'm against all taxes, but That's not the point here. The point is it's favoritism being shown towards the married. What you could see as a model is the state could levy extremely draconian tax measures on non-married people, single men in particular, in an effort to extract their wealth and resources, thereby forcing them, at least in their own minds, to engage in partner seeking in marriage. In fact, in fact, I never got around to making a video on this because it died down after it was brought up, but there was a semi-serious discussion in German politics a few months back wherein it was discussed that non-married, childrenless people, though we all know that most of them are men, should pay 1% extra tax more than married and fathered, mothered children. Than married adults and fathers and mothers. Now, this doesn't seem like a lot, but it is an indication of what the state could enact. More taxes on people who the state doesn't look at as beneficial to society. So what do? You suck their money dry and you take their money from them. If this was being discussed on a broad platform in German politics as a semi-serious idea, which thankfully later was dropped, it's real cause for concern. And Germany is a so-called democratic free society, whatever that means. I'm not really sure anymore. So it's not hard to imagine that that sort of thing, those kinds of measures, could be enacted elsewhere, in Japan, in the UK, in the United States. Married couples already have in many states in the United States. I'm not sure at the federal level certain tax advantages over non-married people. Unjustly, of course. I think everyone should have low to no taxes whatsoever, but that's another issue. So the biological urge and drive for reproduction enforced by women, the state, and men themselves, men going against their fellow men, punishing their fellow men, it's all there. It's all there in the making. We are standing, as it were, at the edge of the abyss. And we can see this in Japan, in a society where the internalized collective pressure put on men there has forced them into a very extreme position and a very extreme reaction. It's going to be a lot more gradual, though not that much more gradual in the United States and in the West in general, because we don't have that neo-Confucianist collectivist society. It's going to take a little longer. But we need to be aware of the very real possibility of the state taking measures that could potentially punish men choosing not to pursue the marriage game. We all know that the marriage game is a game lost. So whilst there are many men who are in the MRA, MRM, who support traditionalist views, traditional marriage, these are the sorts of men who I suspect would have no problem with not only beneficial tax laws to married couples at the detriment of single men, but also would support state coercion and wealth extraction from men who choose not to get married, who choose not to comply with reproductive urges and drives. This is a very real possibility. Remember, most of these drives or instincts are so intense and so strong and so powerful that most men most people simply cannot resist this need to engage in it. Now unfortunately I don't have it right in front of me. I'm gonna have to look it up. But in one of Barbarossa's most recent video, I don't know if it was a troll or not. I'd like to think not, but one gentleman made this comment to the effect of, I simply cannot agree, I cannot resist my urge to be a father, to have a obedient virgin wife, and so on and so forth, something to that effect. I couldn't find it off the, oh, here we go. Quote, I sadly cannot fight my desire to one day become a father and support a submissive virgin who obeys me. It may be pathetic, but I really do need my ego stroked and want fatherhood and lots of children, end quote. Well, who knows if that's a troll or not, but assuming it's not, it just goes to show how powerful that instinct is in everyone, especially in men. Men will go against their fellow men and decry and criticize them simply for rejecting the institution of marriage and the relationship institution as a whole. There's a very real danger of that. The biggest danger, as I said, is that it all becomes politicized. And when it becomes politicized at the state level, do not be surprised when there are state-initiated coercive measures put on the table. I suspect initially, as I said, it will be some sort of tax levy whereby single non-childrenless men will be forced to pay more taxes, and then later on, who knows what might come. But we men who choose to go our own way, we're really going against the grain. And in a society that relies so much, I mean, Japan is a science experiment, basically. In a society that relies so much on collectivist cooperation and collectivist obedience, and obedience to the collective, and the sacrifice and self-immolation of the worker-drone slave in the male, the reaction will be immediate and it will be visceral, and that's what we're seeing now. We see a lack of interest in sex, a lack of interest in the women offering the sex, a lack of interest in marriage because it is a raw deal. It's more than a raw deal over there. It's a terrible deal. And that reaction will be visceral, and the consequences will be seen much more quickly than they would be here in the West or elsewhere. These are things to be aware of, I think, things to be borne in mind. But it's very topical, because as I said, I think we're going to be seeing more and more of this in the days and years to come. Men choosing to, not only with shaming language, but the shaming language has always been there, but beyond shaming language, state-initiated coercive violence, be it in the form of taxes or even worse. I mean, I'm not going to make predictions for the worst, but we already saw in Germany, it was a serious idea being discussed on the table, or semi-serious idea, of requiring single, childless people, and we all know most of them are men, to pay 1% extra tax in comparison to others. That is not a free society. As I said, I suspect that many conservatives and right-wing people, left-wing people, of course, probably would support that anyway, but the ones claiming to be for minimal government intervention would, I think, support that too. In fact, I've talked to many right-wing conservatives, and they have no problem with married couples having tax advantages over non-married because they feel it's beneficial to the human population, what have you. Anyway, enough on that. Yeah, we'll see each other more often in the weeks to come, hopefully. Take care and thanks for watching.